get started. Welcome to today's webinar titled How Slack Drives Change Management. You'll see on the first slide, there's our speaker, Rav Dhaliwal, at Customer Success Summit 2017. It was hosted earlier this year at the end of February. And he had one of the best presentations on stage, a general session, where he spoke about how change management and effectively driving it has really led to the growth of Slack. And he'll speak to some of the impressive numbers and their processes in a little bit. We're also going to be, I wanted to announce before I hand it over, the Customer Success Summit 2018 has been published and is live. It's March 5th and 6th, coming back to San Francisco. The theme is accelerating the impact of customer success. I have a special code for you at the end of the webinar, and we'll also include it in the emails with the replay. But essentially, you should join so you can hear more phenomenal content like Rav's presentation this coming March. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce today's speaker. In addition to Rav Dhaliwal, he's the head of customer success out of the EMEA region for Slack. We have Totango's Vice President of Products, Ravit Danino, joining the call. She's going to share just a couple slides on Totango's point of view about change management. So really here to learn more about Slack. So let's go ahead and hand it over to Rav now. So Rav, do you want to take it away?
Thank you very much, Christine. Well, thank you everybody for attending wherever you are around the world. I am talking to you today from a very cold and rainy London, so hopefully the weather is a bit better than when you are. So as Christine mentioned, my name is Rav Dhaliwal. I've been fortunate enough to be at the inception of Slack's customer success team. I joined in the third week of its existence, and I was the first member outside of North America. And I was also very fortunate enough to have the distinction of opening our London office, where I'm sitting today. So it's been quite a journey over the last couple of years, and I'm really excited to be able to share a bit more about how we think about change management and how we think about driving adoption of Slack. Now, for those of you who may not be quite so familiar, Slack is a messaging platform. It's designed to connect you with the people, tools, and content you use every day to do your work. And our mission at Slack is to make people's working lives simpler, more pleasant, and more productive. Now, that mission seems to be going pretty well. As you can see from this chart, as we're approaching the end of the year, we've hit just over 6 million daily active users. Increasingly, our revenue is coming from international sources, so it doesn't seem to be just a North America phenomenon. And we have a really sticky product. People like using Slack, and they spend a lot of time using it. As you'll see here, over 2.25 hours a day, in fact. So stickiness, and for those of you who may not be aware, this is a traditional English dessert of sticky toffee pudding. It happens to be one of my favorites. But stickiness is something that as success professionals, we're all really aiming for. We want to make our product sticky, and we want to make sure that our customer is getting value from it. And that is actually the best way to make our product sticky, is to make sure that the customer finds value that is actually having a material bottom line impact on their business. But to make our products valuable and to make them sticky, we've got to get people to use them, right? So adoption is absolutely key. Now, you're probably wondering, here at Slack, we've got a product that obviously people seem to love. We've got like really strong usage. People spend a lot of time in the product. Well, what on earth is the problem with adoption? Why do we even have a customer success team? Well, I'll tell you what the problem with adoption is. The problem is really, it's these two guys. So I'm sure you're familiar with these two guys. You see, we've got Justin here on the right. Justin is super cool. He's an engineer. He works in the development team. He read all about Slack on TechCrunch, and he's like, well, I absolutely love this thing. I'm going to go buy it with my credit card. And before you know it, 300 engineers that Justin worked with are all using Slack or the product. And after a little while, Justin's company says, hey, well, this thing looks pretty good. We should look into this. We should buy this for everybody. But poor old Bob here on the left, Bob works in the accounts department. He doesn't know anything about Slack. He doesn't really care about it. He's got his email and SharePoint and all these other stuff and tools he's been given, and he's happy. And this actually fundamentally describes the problem with adoption, which is Bob here on the left, he's been told to use Slack, whereas Justin on the right, he really wants to use it. So we need to help Bob. We need to help Bob through the change and find a new way of working. And I think that is summed up really nicely by this quote. This is a quote from Jerry Dunn from a few years ago, and who at the time was the CIO of Nestle. And it really, really encapsulates the problem. When we're deploying software or a service, it's actually not about the technology. What we're doing is asking people to change the way they work. And change is really, really hard. And so what we've done at Slack is we've spent a lot of time thinking about this problem, thinking about the Bobs of the world, and the people that need help with changing the way they work. So we've created our own change and adoption method, which I'm going to walk you through right now. Now, before we launch into this change and adoption method is purposefully designed to be simple and easy to explain because we want to teach the customer how to do this. And it focuses on the people side of technology and change. And we're going to go through each of these phases at a very high level. But overall, the goal of this adoption method is to do a couple of things. It's designed to raise awareness of Slack. And when I say Slack, you can just substitute that for your product's name or service's name. It's designed to create a desire to use it. It's designed to give people the knowledge about how to use it, and most importantly, apply that knowledge to the day-to-day problems they're trying to solve in their work. But most importantly, what this method is designed to do is to sustain this new way of working. And this is a thing that we've learned from experience both inside and outside Slack, is that if you don't sustain the change that you're asking people to participate in, it won't stick. So you might get a lot of good adoption up front, but eventually it will tail off. So let's dive in and take a look at each of these phases of our approach in a bit more detail. So people and purpose is really about defining the need for the change. So people are much more ready to accept a change, especially a change in the way they work, if they understand why the business is going through it. And we want to define that change in business terms for a number of reasons. So you see here on the slide, there's a really good example of a business reason for a change. In this case, the business reason is the company moving to Slack. There's 3 departments we want to get together so we can try and ship our products 20% faster. Now, we have a business metric now, 20%. So as we roll this thing out and we're asking people to participate in change in a new way of working, we can go back and have a look at that metric and say, are we moving the needle on it? Are we getting close to that 20%? Now, that's only really part of the equation. The other part is the people part. And an important concept here is that change can't really be imposed from the outside. So as success practitioners, we can help facilitate that change. And we can help educate the customer on what's needed to be successful. But we really need people internally to buy into this change and to help us to drive it. In particular, 2 key roles stand out to us definitely at Slack as being particularly pivotal. That's our executive sponsor and our middle management. They are absolutely critical to the effort. Now, I know what some of you may be thinking. You'll be like, yes, well, ideally, we all want an executive sponsor to sponsor the rollout of our product. But at Slack, what we found is that the sponsors need to be active and visible. And so by active, we mean that they're actually out there using the product, they're promoting it, and they're tying it back to those business goals and those business needs. And they're consistently explaining to people the cost of not changing the way we work. Because that is actually just as important as explaining why we need to change. Now, our middle managers or departmental heads, they are absolutely essential because they are going to be leading uses of Slack or your product in their particular department. And so they need to show by example, be available to answer questions, and help their teams through the change. And I can't overstate this enough. You can have strong executive sponsorship, but if your middle managers at the departmental level aren't bought in, it's very unlikely you're going to get a good, strong adoption. And that brings me nicely and neatly onto business uses. So business uses or use cases, which I'm sure is a term that you're all familiar with, this is all about making well, in our case, Slack, but it could be your product. It's all about making it relevant for the employees. Now, one thing that we've learned in particular is that business uses or use cases have a certain, what we call maturity level, and that if you start with the wrong level of maturity, you're potentially going to impact the employees by asking them to go through too much change too early. So what we found is finding use cases that can just help people easily adopt the product, lightweight ones, for example. So here you can see here under adopted, we're just going to publish our newsletters or Slack, or we might do an executive town hall on Slack. That's a really good, simple way with a very minimum change impact to get people to use the product. And then over time, we want them to engage in their day-to-day work. So we want to make sure that they have that knowledge and ability to take that early adopted use and turn it into their day-to-day work. So for example, in this case, in an engaged maturity, managing a project in Slack. So I may be in the marketing department, we're going to run our marketing campaigns in Slack, we'll integrate our marketing tools so everything is in one place. And finally, the ideal level of maturity we want to get to is where we embed Slack into core business processes. So for example, I might be in the field and I might initiate the order of a part from within Slack. And what our learning has told us is if you start off with uses that are too sophisticated, that have too much of a change impact, it can really, really have a negative effect on adoption. So now you may want to stop and think about your products or services and to see if you have a corresponding level of maturity. We have 3 levels here, you may have more, and actually working out whether there are particular types of uses of your product that are the best ways to drive more adoption. Now, setup is something I'm pretty sure all of us are familiar with. As success professionals, we spend a lot of time helping our customers set up or configure our products and services. And what this is really about in our change model is actually making sure that we're not only following the compliance and support needs of our service, but that the actual employees, they know where to go for help. So on this slide, these are just some of the things that we do with customers in order to set up and configure Slack. And I'm not going to delve into any of these in any detail. But what they're all fundamentally designed to do is to remove barriers to adoption. Because what we want is people to be able to use our product from wherever they're working, on whatever device, while still making sure it's a compliant service for the customer. But the most important thing here, the most important thing at setup, is we really want to make sure that our employees know where to go for help. And that when they go for help, they get a very good quality and a good positive response. Because based on our learning, that's the bit that customers often miss out unless we really drive it home with them. And what's interesting is all the change research and the data shows that if you're going through a change and you have a problem and you go to get help to solve that problem and that experience of getting help is poor, you are far less likely to follow through with the change. And finally, the final part of our method is the change component. Now, it's probably a little bit weird to talk about a change methodology and then have a section called change, because change actually underpins all of the steps that I've just run you through. But what I want to focus on here is that while we're doing all these other things, set up and business uses, and we're doing all the things to raise awareness, to drive a desire to use our product, we're imparting knowledge through training, and we really need to reinforce the change. We need to, what we call, sustain it, so that when we've actually launched to a group of users and people are adopting the product, there isn't that tail off in use. So part of that is very key is communications. And so what we found is doing communications pre, during, and post the launch of our product is very important. And this is where our sponsors come into play. So we want to make sure that our executive sponsors are active and visible. Our middle or departmental managers are pushing out the right messages to their teams about the need for the change, the risks of not changing. And especially for those middle managers, again, they need to really emphasize for their teams and departments how this change is going to help you do your day-to-day job better and lead by example. And in order to do these communications, we'll want to consider using different channels to do that, to get these messages out. So we might use the internet, we might send broadcast emails, or even in one-to-ones or team meetings. All of that will depend on the type of organization, but it's just important to know that there are many different channels that are open for you to use. Now, training enablement is obviously something, again, as success professionals, we all spend a lot of time on. And the way we think about this at Slack is really there's two parts to this. We want to impart knowledge about how to use our product. So things like terminology, features, functions. But most importantly, we want to help people to translate that knowledge into an ability to use Slack in their day-to-day work. So specifically those business uses or use cases we spoke about before. Because if we've taught you about the product and how to use it, we can then teach you about how to take those feature functions and apply them to the workflow that you do every day. And finally, in the change piece, this is, again, for us, the most important piece, is that ongoing awareness. How do we sustain and maintain this new way of working once we've launched, once people are adopting? Because we don't want to just stop there. We want to reinforce for everybody how this change is going. We want to share success stories regularly, keep up the momentum, because otherwise we do run a very big risk of the change initially being adopted, but then just tailing off, and then people reverting back to their old behaviors. So how does this look? If we take our 4 steps that I've just run through, we would typically run those in parallel, as you can see here, and we would spend several weeks with the customer setting each of those up, especially the change pieces around the communications and the enablement and the ongoing pieces. And then we would try this out with an early adopter group. And at that point, we would then pause, because what we want to do is to get feedback. We want to get feedback so we can actually understand, are the communications correct? Have we got the right people involved? Did we hit any technical barriers that are stopping people from using the product? Because then we can make some adjustments, and we can make those adjustments if needed, and then we can go on to our next group and so on and so forth. Oftentimes what we found is the communications are fine, the technology is fine, we just may not have the right sponsors involved, and so this gives you a good opportunity to find the right people. And then as we move forward, our groups of users who we bring on can get bigger and bigger and bigger, because with each iteration, we're learning more and more about people's readiness and ability to change. So when this works, it looks a lot like this. So you'll see here is an example where we have a customer trundling along very fairly nicely with fairly flat usage. We put in a change program with them, we spend some concentrated time, and very rapidly we see this nice big drive up in usage, which is ideally what we're all looking for. I'm sure we're all looking for that, because it leads to this. It leads to faster adoption and hopefully more incremental revenue, and preferably much bigger renewals at the end of our term. So a couple of key takeaways before I hand over to Ravit, and I know we're getting close to time. Adoption is really much, much more than just deploying the technology. It's really about introducing a change and helping people through the change and this new way of working. And change is really, really hard. Don't underestimate the fact that the status quo is very, very comfortable for people. So if you remember one thing from this session, I'd say start making the case for a change program early. All the research, and there's plenty of data out there, shows that customers who deploy software as part of an overarching change program are actually 6 times more likely to achieve their business goals. That's a pretty compelling multiple. But a lot of customers don't think that way, so I really feel it's our job as success professionals to educate them, to make that case for change early, even make it in the pre-sale stage, because for the long run, you'll have a happier customer and you'll get much bigger renewals. And so with that, I'm going to hand you over to Ravit from Totango, who's going to share some of Totango's thoughts and learnings about change management. So over to you, Ravit.
Thank you, Rav. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. So I completely agree, and driving change in organization is definitely something very hard and long process in general. And we believe in Totango that Totango will enable you drive it using technology. Technology is the tool to achieve or to drive a successful change management, mainly because of it will enable you drive adoption at scale. It will remove the whole guessing game, like what are my customers are doing, how many of them are using my product. It will enable you see the data and get full visibility. And more than all, when we are looking on a change, our belief is that change is a company game. It's you need to empower everyone in the company in order to drive for change. And this is where we are heading with our product. So Slack is a very strong product, and this is why we wanted to leverage it to empower the whole company to get visibility to customer success initiative and customer success numbers. When we are looking on change, there are two areas that we are addressing. One of them is how can you drive an external change with technology, and the other one is how can you drive internal change with technology. So external change, what does it mean? How do you do? Basically, what we want to do is to drive customer change behavior based on activities that they are doing and based on adoption of the product. Totango campaigns will enable you achieving it by driving campaigns based on the customer behavior. So in Totango, basically, you can see how customers are using our product and proactively reach out to the customers following their activities in order to drive a change in their behavior. More than that, and even more importantly than that, we enable you to put goals for those campaigns, so you can drive campaigns or additional campaigns if you didn't meet your original goal, or if you see that a customer changed its behavior and now you can drive a different campaign towards him. You can see in the example on the right side, for example here, that I targeted 45 accounts in this example, and only 20 were impacted by this specific campaign. I managed to achieve the goal only with 20 accounts, which means I still need to target in a different way the additional accounts that I have here, and I still have some work to do with my reaching out to customers. Another thing that we talked about when you're doing campaigns, when you're doing change management, is how can you drive internal change with technology. And there are a few ways to do it, but the first thing is to make sure that your internal users are part of the change you are driving. We believe in Totango that there are several ways to achieve it, and you have to be proactive in this process. The first one is we are providing an early warning system that will send notifications and alerts to when customer health is changing, to make sure that you are proactively engaged with that account. You can drive success plays that are like automatic coaches, automatic customer success coaches that will be part of what you will achieve with Totango. You will be able to configure the behavior and configure the response to a specific customer behavior using those tools. And last but not least, and more importantly, in order to drive the whole company to be part of the change behavior, in order to make sure that the whole company is part of the customer success and not only the customer success team, you can leverage Zoe, and by that give every employee the ability to understand customer status, customer engagement, and how you should reach out to customers. On the right side, you can see an example where you can look at a specific customer. Globex Corporation in this example gets a lot of details on the customer status, how much money he spends, when his renewal is up to. You can also drill down further to get some more details on the usage of that specific customer, and by that proactively make sure that you engage with your account, and not only the customer success team, but the entire company, in order to make sure that change is driven throughout the company. So this is our belief. This is how technology can drive change management specifically for customer success organizations. And without further ado, I want to hand it over back to Christine for several questions.
Thanks, Ravit, and thanks, Rav. All right, so let's jump into questions. We have 5 minutes remaining. Go ahead and submit them in the bottom left corner. And while the presenters look at the questions, I want to just remind everyone that Customer Success Summit is coming up March 5th and 6th. And if you register with Encore 100 as a special code, you'll save $100 off of early bird pricing by this Friday, December 15th. All right, jumping back to questions. A lot have come through. Here's one from Anna for you, Rav. So are the executives and middle managers that support the changes on the client's team or on your own team? And if they're on the client's team, how do you encourage them to continually communicate with their team about adoption?
That's great. Thank you, Anna. That's a really great question. So yeah, just to clarify, the middle managers and sponsors are on the client side for sure. They're actually probably the single most important thing to be successful with adoption. In terms of encouraging them, there's some tactical things, which is part of what we do in terms of the methodology we have is under those 4 steps, we have a whole bunch of assets. So we actually have standard sort of templates for executive communications, for middle management communication. So we can help draft them for those. And so we actually make the process of them sending out encouraging messaging much simpler for them. But really the way what we encourage them is to get them brought into the idea through the sales process. So as part of actually doing the sales process, and this is something we work very closely with our account executives on, we do stress the importance of their participation and we try to get buy-in from there. Now that is hard, that's not always possible. And so sometimes we may not have an exec sponsor, or sometimes we may have not so great middle management sponsorship. But depending on whether you have one or the other, if you've got an exec sponsor and they're bought in, they can be very useful at bringing detractors along at the middle management level and getting them back on site. So I hope that answers your question. Apologize.
If you identify a sponsor, how do you go about finding the right person in the organization?
Yeah, that can be tricky because it depends on what level the sponsor is that turns out to be the wrong one. So if it's a middle manager sponsor, then you would typically go up to your executive sponsor, the level above, and obviously very delicately indicate that we think there's a problem here or a blocker to adoption, and we would normally ask them to help. If you have the wrong executive sponsor, again, that can be very tricky. So far for us, that's not been too much of a problem, but then typically what you would want to do is probably go back to your account team, highlight the problem, and to see if there's actually a way to get them on board or to actually get maybe a peer of theirs to help encourage them to be on. There's no one right answer to that. Sometimes you have to proceed sometimes without good executive sponsorship. It's risky, but sometimes that is just an unfortunate occurrence.
Great, thank you. And so Ty had a couple questions. How do you measure the success of adoption at Slack? And then how do you know what's working and not working with the adoption process? Any learnings you want to share?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in terms of measuring success overall, we tend to split that into 2 parts. So there's a qualitative and a quantitative part. So the quantitative part is simply looking at adoption numbers, weekly active usage, daily active usage, how many messages are being posted, how many in private, how many public. Obviously, we can't see people's content, but we see data about the data, how many integrations, apps being installed, all those kinds of things. So that's the quantitative part. The qualitative part actually goes back to those business uses. So when we actually say, for example, roll out Slack into a sales department, part of the work that we'll do at the beginning is to actually define with the customer what processes are going to be moving forward and what does a measure of success look like. So for example, if we roll out to a sales organization and they want to use Slack to share competitive information, one of their metrics might be, by doing that in Slack to a wider audience, we want to see if we can improve our conversion rate of opportunities to actually deals. And so that could be a metric assigned to that business use. So again, qualitative, so that's again at the use case level. Qualitative is simply measuring user sentiment, and you can capture that in a number of ways. So either through a survey mechanism, through a feedback channel in Slack or an app. And I would advise it's always good to get both. It's always good to get some hard numbers on usage, on whether business processes are improving, as well as actually direct qualitative feedback from users.
Thank you. Okay, let's just do one more question. I know it's the bottom of the hour, but a couple of people wanted to know how much time does your team spend on the change management activities, and how much time is needed by the client roles? And also curious, a couple of people want to know, is this paid for by the client? Is it an additional charge, or is it provided for free?
That's a really great question. There's a couple of questions there. So as to how much time we spend on the change management activities, there's no hard and fast rule on that because it really depends on where the customer is on their journey. So Slack, as you may know, is a free product. People can use it for free, and then they can opt to convert to a paid plan if they need specific extra things. So in some instances, we've got nothing to roll out because there's already 2,000 people using it, the customers purchased it. So then really what we're doing is spending some time on the change front, analyzing the user sentiment, analyzing how well they're using Slack, and maybe then putting in an enablement program or a communications program to drive more mature use. That's often quicker than actually doing a rollout, and the rollout in terms of how much effort that takes is really actually dependent on the resources available on the customer side, which actually answers the second part of the question, which is the time needed by the client roles. So some organizations, for example, large rollout, they'll dedicate a project manager, they'll have someone from L&D available part of the time, someone from comms, and so therefore it goes much quicker. Some organizations don't have that level of resource, so it will go a lot slower. So unfortunately I can't give you a strong indicator there, but I would say from the team's perspective, they're probably spending 50-60% of their time when we're deploying on change style activities, if not more, depending on the client. And do we charge for the service? Well, we actually have two options. So if you want to essentially, if the customer wants to lead the rollout themselves and they have a project manager, for example, and they have some of those other resources I mentioned, and they just need our guidance, then we don't charge for that. That's part of the subscription, and the success manager's job there is to walk them through our framework. If they have their own method, incorporate ours into theirs, and then help them through the process of deploying. Some of our larger customers don't have the resource, and they say, well, actually, we would like a team on the ground to help do this. And so we have recently started a paid services offering where we will put a change lead, an enablement lead, technical architect, and a engagement manager on the ground. But that's by no means mandatory. That's just come from some customers from asking for it.
Thank you. So I think that was all the questions that we could answer. I want to thank both Rav and Ravit for coming today and presenting, and thank all of the participants.